Well, this is still Sunrise Daily. That was Business Morning on Sunrise Daily. And the whole package usually goes in a particular direction. And here now, we want to talk about you. What are the things that you need to do to manage your expectations in the year ahead? Now, with me in the studio is Kuro John Gobo, who is Head of Faculty and Lead Consultant, Purple Training and Consulting. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Ayo, and Happy New Year.
I wish you the same. It was a year, right?
It was.
For those who didn't expect the way, this year, January 1st, 2025, as on January 1st, 2024, people had expectations. People had things lined up, planned out. People wrote some things down. But a good number of people may not have seen some of the things that they experienced ahead. So tell us about all of those dynamics and why there is a need to take a second look at anything now.
Okay, I've spent the past week talking about resolutions, and it's been an interesting conversation. Why do you start? Why don't they work? What do you have control over? And I think the first distinction I tried to make was that the resolution is not necessarily a goal, and usually people make them in the moment. But we'll come to that later. How do we handle these expectations? Let's first clarify what an expectation is. It is simply a belief or a notion about a future event or about yourself or someone else, maybe in terms of their performance or what you expect them to do in behavior. The truth is, with expectations, you don't know what's coming ahead. And people need to understand that. And I think that's where most people, we're not very real with ourselves when we start making plans and deciding what kind of expectations to carry through the year. Now, last year was a very interesting year. We saw things leapfrog from 1 to hundreds in no time. In terms of prices, people lost jobs, people got jobs. To many people, it was probably one of the worst years we've had in terms of economy and all of that. But guess what? To some people, it was their best year yet. And I think a lot of that had to do with how they manage expectations, not just going into the year and, hoping or believing on things. And please know, this is important. Expectations have different dimensions to them. Sometimes they are realistic, sometimes they are not. Sometimes they are positive, sometimes they are negative. Some of them are even unspoken. Nobody talks about them at all. But expectations have a very great impact on our lives. They affect our behavior, which then determines our results. They affect our self-esteem. They lead to satisfaction sometimes disappointment. They even affect our emotions and feelings. So people need to take them a little more seriously as we go ahead.
So generally, when people talk about New Year's, I was listening, by the way, to Dr. Sam Adeyemi yesterday.
Okay. And
he said something at the beginning of his speech. He said in the middle of the 90s, 94, 95, there was a lot of tumult. It was about that time, I think between a year and two before then, was the famous June 12 election annulment, which was adjudged the freest and fairest. And of course, the hula baloo that resulted from that. Yeah. But he also made a point that was about the same time, rough and tumultuous as the period was. That was about the same time that many people started businesses. Many people thrived a lot at that time. In the midst of all of that hullabaloo, in the midst of all of that tumult, in the midst of all of that political uncertainty, upheaval, impasse, that was one of the words that came up at that time. So looking at that, and if we can compare that time to now, is there a comparison?
I think there is, and that's why I mentioned earlier that some people had their best year yet, in the same year where some people had it bad. If you check the Forbes 500, the largest companies in the world today, quite a few of them were birthed during a time of depression. And people think depression is just something human beings go through. Economy is go through depression. There could be a recession and a depression if it continues. So America had a great depression, and things were really bad. One of the things that happens to people when things get bad is mindset shift. people need to begin to realign things. So you begin to check your wants and your needs differently when there's less in terms of resources. How do they say that thing? Necessity is the mother of invention. So where there's more of a necessity, people need to begin to do things differently. Case in point, pap and custard could actually be the same, but the price differential is wide. You could not live without custard when you could afford it. When the money is no longer available, pap becomes attractive. When the desirable is not available, the available becomes desirable. So the truth is, when people have less, they find ways, or they should find ways, to do more with less. And most times, entrepreneurs get born from there, innovation comes from there. Actually, many companies have been built on the back of a bad economy. Many people have changed what they do, chosen to look for more sources of income, provide more value. And this is the primary reason why. When the economy is bad and things are bad, there are more problems. So people who have the right mindset, more problems means more opportunities.
Now, when you say that people need to adapt to economic realities, what do you mean? Here's the reason for the question.
Okay.
It's already bad.
Clearly.
And it's a global phenomenon.
True.
Everyone in the world is talking about the same thing. And mention the sector. There is a downward look. But then looking at the economic outlook, the president is looking up, because a number of things as far as the president and the indices available to him are concerned, things are looking up. What goes up in Nigeria is beginning to come down. And strange as that is, it's one of the points that the president is using to score himself. So when you say adapting to economic realities, what are you talking about, particularly for individuals and small businesses?
Okay, it's become clear now that whatever happens in the economy affects us. I mean, in the past, when people felt insulated from it, I mean, I could go out. Now, I don't think anybody is insulated or is not affected by the economy. So people need to understand that if the economy is generally better, usually there's more going around, so you don't have to do much to get more. If the economy is not doing so well, then you should do more to get more. That's the mentality I think people need to adopt. Let's talk about the budget. I'm not the greatest economist in the world, but I pay attention to what the country is trying to do, because it speaks to, those budget figures speak to what we expect to happen. Let's talk expectations a bit. So currently, FX rates are about 1,550, thereabout. The budget for this year, 2025, says FX rates will be at 1,400 to $1. Inflation rate today is 34.6%. The budget says we expect inflation to come down to 21%. You mentioned things going up and coming down. Part of the expectations. We're doing 1.6 million barrels per day with crude oil production. We expect to go to 2 million barrels per day. OPEC quota being set aside. OPEC thinks we should be doing about 1.5. A few things I just thought to look at quickly. Now, question is this. Whenever somebody says, my expectation is this, they would usually then put it down on paper, and they have assumptions leading to the expectations are what lead to the budget. So because we expect dollar rates to be 1,400 to $1, we have set certain things in the budget. Expenditure will be X, income will be Y, those kind of things. The government cannot continue to do things the same way and expect a different result. Same thing should happen to individuals. In fact, we hear that insanity, according to Einstein, is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So I think what people should begin to do is this. Pay attention to the fact that you must learn to do more with less. When the economy is not booming, you would naturally have less. But you must continue to live, you must continue to pay fees, you must continue to pay rent and all of that. Begin to think that way. And with expectations, please pay attention. This is so key. Be honest with your expectations of yourself and other people. Nigeria is one country people like to show off more than what they have. This is the time when we need to be real with ourselves, with everything, not just finances, everything generally. Many of these things we've discussed in the past.
But then, in terms of expectations, the workplace is a place where everybody expects more.
True.
More pay, more benefits, more emoluments, more promotions, better opportunities, and limitless possibilities.
Sure.
So what are the things that you would advise that anyone who is supposed to resume work tomorrow, or maybe even Monday, should be looking at in terms of workplace dynamics?
My suggestion is to plan to give more value to get more value. I think it's an unfair conversation to walk up to an employer in this economy, or anyone experiencing what the world is experiencing today, and say, I want a raise because the economy is bad. I want a raise because there's inflation. I think it's unfair. Guess what? The same things you deal with as an individual, your employer would be dealing with. And it is the value you produce at work that gives more value to your employer, that gets more value for your employer, and then brings more value to you. So my thinking would be, plan to give more value to your employer. I'd rather walk up to you and say, sir, in the last 1 year, I have brought in 80% of the clients. I have done X, Y, Z to increase our efficiency. I've saved you 2 billion naira. You should say amen to that.
Of course. I say amen.
I've saved you 2 billion naira in the last 1 year. I think I've pulled my weight enough to request for an increase in what is coming back to me. That's a more fair statement than just to say, because the economy is bad, we should increase what we're doing. Now, employers, please don't take it as an excuse. If we can do more as employers, yes, please do more. But the truth is, we have to balance both out. So people going back to work, ask yourself, how much more value can you bring to the workplace, so that you can then demand more value from the workplace? And the easiest, fastest way to do so is start thinking how to use small things to achieve big things. Less time, less resources, less stress. Do the work once and not have to do it twice. I plan every year using a planner. This is one I said I'll show it to you today. This is my last year's planner. This is December. This is 2025. Every day, I would write down the things I want to do and begin to plan to do them quicker, faster, better. My simple analogy is that money always follows value, and the more value I put out, the more value I'll get. So if you want a promotion, begin to plan to do more. Begin to plan to give more value. Even if you don't ask for it, normally you would deserve it. And where they don't give you enough value for what you bring in where you work today, maybe it's time to look for other things to do with the remaining time you have. You have a 24-hour day split into 3 parts. That's 8, 8 hours for your employer. You have 16 for yourself. Maybe it's time to do more with that time.
Some would say it's a tough call. But then, looking at the challenges are limitless and they are enormous.
True.
And, talk to us, before I bring in Kayla, talk to us about the need for mental health support, particularly at the workplace. Many times you can't predict what's going to happen, but it will happen. There is no way such things will not affect deliverables. So, do you see a responsibility for the workplace or for the individuals to protect their own mental health?
I think it's both ways. People talk about work-life balance as if we expect our work to balance our lives. The truth is, your work, or occupation is just 1 in 8 parts of you. There's physical, mental, spiritual, and co. So if your other areas, the other aspects are not balanced, your work will not be balanced. It will affect work. So responsibility number 1 is on you. Pay attention to your body, pay attention to your mind, what you take in, do the work and get the job done. Many people in today's world just do enough to earn. Now that's the employees' perspective. For the employers, can we begin to do a little more? I'm a bit of both, so I can speak for both sides. For the employers, we should be able to do a little more. Some of the things that take money out of your employees' pockets the most would be commute, especially in the city of Lagos, but in most other parts of Nigeria. Commute, daily commute, and lunch money, when they eat lunch, when they come to work every day. So how about you begin to look for ways to ameliorate that? There could be packages given directly to help you rent homes closer to your place of work, or hire people close to, that live close to where your workplace is. Begin to ask yourself seriously, how often do you really need people to come into the office physically? Are you measuring attendance or are you measuring productivity? They are 2 different things. So that I come to work at 6 a.m. and close at 9 p.m. doesn't mean I'm productive. It could be that I'm a time waster. All right? Are there things I could do outside of the workplace? Can we have clear, measurable KPIs that could make me work outside the workplace? You don't have to come. So the first guy I hired as a person, I hired in 2018. And I told him from day 1, you'd resume in the office 2 days a week. He didn't take the job at first because he didn't understand why anybody would not come to work every day. And I told him, once you have a laptop and I give you Wi-Fi, you don't have to come to work every day. So when COVID came in 2020, he was in shock. How did I know? I said I just tailored what I was doing with you to suit both of us. I can't pay you top dollar for the job, but I can reduce your expenses and allow you to do more with your time. Employers need to begin to do that. Some people have staff bosses. Some provide lunch in the workplace. Some even bring counselors to talk to employees every now and then. Some send their staff on trainings so they can learn to do more with less. Employers need to begin to think like that, because if you don't manage your greatest resource, the assets on the job, they will mess you up.
Kayla.
I mean, I'm smiling from ear to ear listening to Mr. Ngobo there. I've written down a few things. You've dashed a few of the hopes of the Nigerian people, because a lot of people were looking at this economy and thinking, well, once I resume work on Monday, I'm going to my Oga's office to tell him, sir, the economy is hard. I need more money. So you're saying, no, we shouldn't do that. Instructive, very instructive statements there. And then, of course, you know, the talk about, you know, people, employers, you know, instead of increasing money, which really isn't going to make any difference, why don't you help your staff reduce the cost of a lot of things that take a lot of their money, and in many cases, actually food and transportation.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about the home, if you can help us, so we can cut our cloth according to our cloth. I mean, cut our coats according to our cloth,
yes.
Not according to our size. So as we're trying to navigate this economy, we're hearing inflation might even go higher. Things are going to get a little bit more expensive, at least according to the figures that we're seeing. The government says they're going to do everything to push it down. Now, in fact, I wrote down 3 major things happening this year. The National Credit Guarantee Company is coming up immediately. The president is asking for a $1 trillion economy. He said that's the plan for 2025. National Values Charter will be coming up this year as well. And we also hear that the Youth Confab will be taking place in the first quarter of this year. So while the government is doing their bit, we are still having to grapple with an astronomical increase in the cost of everything. How do we manage it in the home front?
I think it's back to what I asked at first. Manage your expectations will still be the starting point. And it starts with you, all right? We need to pay attention to a few things like what are needs, what are wants, what do I have to do, what do I not have to do, and begin to work around that. And the starting point probably will be to create a budget. The same way the federal government created a budget and had assumptions attached. Do the same thing and begin to match income to expenses. When it comes to, people talk about managing as if it only speaks to money. But the truth is money affects all of these things. So this I've expressed a few times in the past. If you are going into a new year, you should be asking yourself, whether I'm going into a new year or not, can you afford what you are living with or living by today? Can you really afford it? If you live in an apartment where your apartment is 1.2 million naira in rent a year, you should just save 100,000 naira a month. If you can't save 100,000 naira a month, you are living above your means. Simple logic. Find a 600,000 naira apartment and pull out 50K every month. You would have less financial stress from paying your rent. Do the same thing with fees. Do it with food. I mean, find ways to do different things, like carpooling. We've expressed that before. If 5 of us, Ayo, myself, you, and 2 others, live in the same environment and work in the same office, why do I have to drive 5 days a week? Why don't I drive 1 day a week and then join Ayo on Tuesday, join you on Wednesday, join someone else on Thursday, and cut cost? Don't expect employers to make changes to suit you. Expect government to make changes in expenditure to help you, but you're not making any yourself. So start thinking in that wise and learn to do more with less. The more you pay attention to that, do more with less, the more productive you become, the more value you give, the less stress you have, mental or any other kind of stress.
I mean, one of the biggest stresses that we face in this country is January. January and its 365 days. And every bill comes in January.
Yep.
So for the person right now who's thinking school fees, January, rent, January, memorial for my grandmother, January, Everything is happening in January. How do you manage the expectations, knowing that you really want a particular quality, especially when it comes to schools? You see a lot of people putting their children in these very expensive schools, and it's not because they love the school, the money they are paying. It's because, well, I want my kids to have a particular standard of education, and I want them to go to particular schools. But things have changed, and those prices. How do I manage that? How do I not pull my child out of a good school and put him in a school that I think is giving them less, and still be able to manage my finances and all of this? How do we handle that?
Let's start with schools and be clear about something. That something is expensive does not always mean it is the best. Let's start from there. So many parents send children to schools and don't check on their words, the kind of education they are getting, the kind of value they produce, how they speak, how intelligently they can communicate. So maybe we should begin to check those things again. I don't think the best schools are cheapest, but I think we need to begin to measure, because the thing here is not cutting costs, is maximizing cost, getting value for every money you get. So it's January already. Starting point with schools is check and confirm that they get the best they can in that environment. And education is not just what they teach them, it's people they relate with, their colleagues in school and all. Secondly, begin to plan such that you don't have this January pressure. January is the longest month. I hear somebody said January is 99 days or worse. The reason is because, like you said, many things come together in January. What if I choose to stagger them? What if I don't pay rent in January and I pay in June? And I can deliberately do that. What if I get to a point where every month of the year, which is the biggest thing, I have a portion of my money set aside for that January problem. So if I have rent to pay, save rent every month. If I have school fees to pay, calculate the amount for a full year, convert it to a monthly figure, and put that figure away every month. If you do that, you see this January pressure people have, you won't have it. And that is one thing people need to pay attention to the most. We don't earn annually in Nigeria. We earn monthly, but we have many annual bills to pay. Begin to do a match between your income and your expenditure. Do that match better, and most likely you have less stress.
I mean, I do know that you work with a lot of young people. I mentioned earlier that the youth confab is in the first quarter of this year. Just so, as someone who has, some experience with young people, what kind of, and they say that there's going to be a recruitment process. It's going to be done by the Ministry of Youth. They're going to be able to recruit these young people, get them to discuss what kind of country they want, what kind of changes they want in their country, how they want to navigate 2025 and the following month, just so it doesn't focus on politics for 2027. In your view, as a young person, let's say I get nominated to be at the Confab, what kind of conversations should young people be having that can impact their future?
First thing is to think sustainability and strategy. Those two things are not short-term conversations. A major reason why in Nigeria we start and stop and start and stop, especially when leadership changes, is because we don't have a long-term plan anybody is chasing. So a new government, governor, president comes into power and says, my mandate is X, and we pursue X for 4 years. And then when the new person comes, we drop X and start with Y. Please go into that confab and discuss long-term. That's the first major thing I would say. If every country we aspire to relocate to jackpot to live in, to go on holidays have done long-term plans. And that's what we should be doing. The first thing, we should stop making short-term plans in Nigeria. You can have a vision for 20 years and then have annual goals to pursue them. Everything they discuss with you in that confab should be long-term starting points. Second thing is there should be clear strategies to get them done. We're beyond being bamboozled into saying we'll create 3 million jobs. And there has to be a way. Government is not supposed to be creating jobs for us. Government should just make the environment enabling, and we would create the jobs. So people need to begin to think from that perspective. And thirdly, if I have a chance to chip this in, the average age in Nigeria today is 17.6, 18 years thereabout. That means there are many young people. Please don't let the people who are older and who have been in Nigeria long enough tell you how the next 40 years will be. They will not be here. I'm not cursing them, it's just the truth. Anybody 90 today, 80, 70, 60, I don't think they expect to be here in 40 years. So don't plan with them in your mind. Let them help with the planning. I mean, they are the helm of affairs today, but begin to think like that. Where do you see Nigeria in the next 30 years, next 40 years? Why do other countries have crude oil? And they are fantastic countries in terms of everything they have, and we're not. Start asking questions in that dimension. I think that's the best thing to do. And please don't go there and get bribed by anybody. Don't drink Coke, collect riba, as we call it in Nigeria, and then go back home, feel good. You'd have done us a major disservice if you get into that confab and come back out and nothing changes. In fact, some of us will look for you and ask you questions.
Well, I guess one thing that, since Kayla said she picked up a pen and paper and started to write notes, maybe it's a good opportunity to tell someone, you need to watch this episode of the program again. And guess what? It will be on our YouTube page for you to check out Channels TV on YouTube. Thank you so much for coming this morning.
Thank you very much.
John Agobo is Head of Faculty and Lead Consultant, Purple Training and Consulting. Thank you. We appreciate your time again.
Thank you very much.